Singing Frogs Farm is a diverse family farm located just a stone's throw northwest of downtown Sebastopol, California. On that farm, they grow over 100 varieties of vegetables, as well as many fruits, berries, flowers, herbs, and eggs. Singing Frogs Farm won the 2010 National Farmer Rancher Award for Pollinator Conservation and the 2013 Leadership in Sustainability Award in Sonoma County, California. Singing Frogs Farm is a unique no-till farm. Their no-till system of soil management has brought back tremendous health to the soil, raising their soil organic matter by over 300% in just the past 5 years. It's also a dedicated ecological farm. The farm does not use any sprays of any kind. Instead of sprays, they encourage the presence of our Mother Nature. Their landscape management derives from the proven priorities of agroforestry, permaculture, and biodynamics that an abundance of life creates balance, harmony, and really delicious food. The farm owners believe we owe it to our children to leave the world a better place than we found it. They believe sustainability does not need to result in a Spartan, boring lifestyle of zero consumption. Paul and Elizabeth Kaiser own Singing Frogs Farm, which is also a CSA-supported farm. Singing Frogs Farm grosses over $100,000 a year per crop acre, compared to a typical organic farm in California, which grosses about $12,000 per crop acre per year. Please join me in welcoming Paul Kaiser.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Quivira Coalition for the invitation. This is really a joy and a pleasure. And especially a huge thank you to my wife, Elizabeth, right in front. You can stand up, because she is phenomenal. She does all the support and is the most amazing person in my life, hands down. Thank you, hon. Our background, we met in Peace Corps, the Gambia, in West Africa, and she was doing human health and I was doing environmental health. And so my background is really in agroforestry, which we'll hear a lot more about with the next speaker. And agroforestry, I was working with perennial tree species on other farmers' annual field cropping systems. So I wasn't actually doing the farming, I was helping them bring Mother Nature back onto their farmscapes for rejuvenation, resiliency, and vitality. And since then, I got a couple master's degrees in natural resources management and sustainable development. And then we managed to settle down in Sonoma County, California, and start our own vegetable farm, which means we're now focusing on annual crops in a temperate zone, where my background was perennial crops in a tropical hot, dry zone. So soil biology and ecology is the same across both those areas, but I had to relearn my species, relearn my native species, my perennial species and annual species and that kind of stuff. But the soil biology is still the same between the hot temperate zone and the cooler hot tropical zone and cooler temperate zone. I'm actually kind of excited because I usually spend the first half of my presentation talking about soil science, and all of you know soil science really well. In fact, the speakers we've had earlier this morning and yesterday blew my mind. It was wonderful to watch them and how they presented the topics on soil science. So I get to skip most of the why of our farming technique and move into the how. And I know a lot of you are here because you want to know that how. You want to know, how do we apply a lot of these Mother Earth and ecological and soil principles to our farming system to get the results that we get. So I get to spend most of my presentation talking about that, and hopefully I want to leave a lot of time for Q&A, because I know many of you would like to know more about this, what we're doing, and how it could be applied to you. You've all probably heard some version of this quote, but industrial agriculture is arguably the single most destructive human activity to the environment, as well as to human health and well-being. So I'm still starting on big scale here. In fact, greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture account for about 1/3 of all human or anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. So agriculture itself is about 14% of GHG emissions, and deforestation for agriculture to make more room is another 17%. So combined, about 1/3 of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions comes from agriculture and clearing land for agriculture. But, and this is what I love, I was at an international conference on climate change and agriculture at UC Davis about 2 years ago, and they're presenting some fairly new research looking at how do we mitigate greenhouse gas emissions on this planet? How do we reduce them? And they were looking at all the different sectors of our economy, and they found that hands down, agriculture had the most potential to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, and it was the cheapest way to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. That's actually a really huge concept to keep in our mind. Agriculture has the potential, and it's the cheapest to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. How is that so? Was it capturing all the farts from the sheep and the cows and methane emissions? It wasn't. Turns out 89% of the mitigation potential in agriculture comes from better soil management. And that's why we're all here, is better soil management. That is where all that mitigation potential for greenhouse gas emissions comes from. It's better soil management. So, I love this quote for two reasons. One, it's a beautiful quote. Essentially, all life depends upon the soil. There can be no life without soil, and no soil without life. They have evolved together. Better is look at the date at the bottom of that. It's a USDA quote from 1938, a long time ago. We have known for a very long time the importance of soil and soil health, but agriculture has not always kept up with science. And there are three things on this planet that allow us to have life: the sun, rain and water, and soil, the organic matter in soil specifically, not the mineral or the air or the water, but the organic matter of soil. Those three things allow us to have life because the organic matter is what takes death and transforms it into available nutrients to have life. Without that organic matter to decay death, death would simply pile up around us and we would run out of nutrients. So organic matter is the critical component of taking death and turning it back into life. So those three things that allow us to have life on this planet, two of them we can't really impact. The sun we can't impact, the rain we can't really impact, though we are slowly. But organic matter in the soil we absolutely can and do impact. As you all know, we have been nothing but degrading our soil for 10,000 years. This chart's interesting because one, it's a UNEP chart on soil degradation. One, there's no category on this chart for improved soils. It's only neutral and degraded. Secondly, where are those neutral areas? It's entirely in areas that humans don't farm. In Arctic tundra, in high Gobi deserts, Sahara Desert, all the places we don't farm are the places we haven't yet degraded. So, another quote from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, the FAO: tillage is one of the major practices that reduces the organic matter level in the soil. Very simply put, but I love to hear that the FAO is saying that. Likewise, I'd love to hear the USDA quoted as saying, tilling the soil is the equivalent of an earthquake, hurricane, tornado, and forest fire occurring simultaneously to the world of soil organisms. Simply stated, tillage is bad for the soil. That's the USDA. Despite the fact that they have lots of subsidy programs promoting tillage. So we're all kind of multi-faced here, but let's see. So I guess that was my 3-minute version of my 30, 40-minute soil science part because everyone else covered it. And I want to talk about our farm. We are just 2.5 acres of crop production on about an 8-acre parcel. There's a lot of land on our farm that we can't use. It's got a lot of character to the land. 6 or 7 ponds, some bamboo groves put in by the prior owners, some redwood trees, some oak woodland, a lot of narrow little winding places that you just can't do much with except have pasture there. And then, of course, house, barn, parking area, that kind of stuff. So only 2.5 acres of production. And we are non-mechanized no-till. So when you Google no-till and you start reading about no-till, that is entirely the mechanized no-till you're reading about, the roller crimper system. And as we know, many roller crimper users and no-till operators have been very successful in doing no-till without herbicide, which is tremendous, and that's awesome. But the other truth is, as we've applied no-till to our rangelands and our fields, we've actually increased the use of herbicide in conjunction with that increase in no-till. So we are non-mechanized, just to say that. Our 2.5 acres, we do about 120 member CSA, year-round. We're in a Mediterranean climate, in theory. We also do 2 very high volume year-round farmers markets and 2 very high volume seasonal farmers markets and a couple of high-end restaurants as well. So that's our outlet for our food. That's who we're feeding. And all these places are within about 12 miles of our farm. So everything is right there, present in our community. I'll let you digest. I like this slide. One organic myth: selective pesticides. They don't read name tags, are you good or bad? So pesticides do kill everything. They kill the good bugs, they kill the bad bugs. And unfortunately, as you may know, when you have things like mice and deer and all the pest insects, that kind of the prey class, they're the ones who have really high reproduction rates and lots of young, rabbits, etc. But the predator class, the beneficial insects like praying mantids or lions or tigers or whatever else, the predator class, they have very few young, very long gestation periods and very long growth rates. So the predator class takes a long time to come back if you kill it off. The pest class comes back immediately. Therefore, by the virtue of using pesticides, you immediately are necessitating a further use of it because your pests are going to come back more rapidly than the predators. But I'm telling you all the things you already know. So, one thing I want to mention about our farm that's kind of unique is we are in a Mediterranean climate. We are in Sonoma County, California. It's wine country. But we happen to have a little valley bottom that is exquisitely cold. And the prior owners told us, oh, it's cold here. But you don't know what that means until you move in and live there for 8 or 9 years. And as you can see, our personal frost-free season is about 10 to 12 weeks. Or how are we, 12, 14 weeks? Pretty darn minimal, like really minimal. Most of our friends who are farmers and also competitors, they have their first frost, their last frost in the spring will be about April 1st or so, and their first frost won't be till Thanksgiving or Christmas. And we're going June 1st to late September is all we got. So we are exceptionally cold. In fact, from our mailbox to our bottom field is a 9-degree temperature difference pretty much every winter morning. So when we wake up in the morning and all of our neighbors up by the mailboxes, they had a beautiful, nice morning, 37 degrees, 35 degrees, and we had 29, 28. We were in the frosts. So we typically spend about 7 weeks every winter in the teens, and we definitely are very cold, let's just say that. One thing I want to mention about this that I'll get to later too is I believe our soil organic matter increases have really helped us to extend our seasons. As I mentioned, we're a year-round CSA farm. In fact, there are 25 CSA farms based in Sonoma County, and of those 25, only 3 do a year-round CSA. 22 of them don't do winter CSA. We are the coldest farm by far, and the other 2 who do year-round CSAs, one of them has lots and lots of high tunnels and buys in all their other produce, about half the produce, from a different county further south. And the other farm is really, really good at preserving their summer harvests to give out in the winter. So neither of them actually does fresh harvest vegetables in the winter. We're the only farm that does that, and we're the coldest by a long shot. So the talks that everyone have given up to this point about soil organic matter and soil health have really boiled down to these 4 USDA recommendations on how you improve your soil organic matter. And you can go to pretty much any soil science lab at any university, and you'll get their own version of these same 4 things. And these are critical. You need to disturb the soil as little as possible. You need to grow as many different species of plants as practical. Keep living plants in the soil as often as possible. Don't leave bare dirt. And keep the soil covered all the time, whether that means with plants and leaves or with mulch or some other way to keep the sun and wind off your soil. So these are the 4 most critical things. And I'm going to talk about these 4 and how they apply with Singing Frogs Farm over the next 15 minutes or so here. That would be a good example of how we do it in words, and then I want to go through these one by one to show you how we do it physically. First one, disturbing the soil as little as possible. You can imagine already that means no-till. So the average, the very, very top of this, you see average of US agricultural soils back in 1920 was 6 to 8% soil organic matter, sown. And typical ag soils today, over on the left, are only 1 to 3%. And 3% is generous for sure. And then our chart is going up. And what I have here are 2 different studies that were done on how to improve organic matter through tillage. One was by UC Davis, the first 3 on the left, and the next 3 in the middle right were by Rodale Institute, and the last one is us on the far right. So this is our baseline soil organic matter. Davis, their baseline organic matter was 1%. Rodale was about 1.9 to 2.1%, and ours was 2.4%. We had a little bit higher beginning organic matter levels just because it hadn't been farmed as long before we arrived. So that was good to start with. Now, the change of organic matter over time with these various tillage things, going from left to right, the Davis system, the first one is conventional. Tillage had no improvement, stayed at 1% after 10 years. And the next one was the low input organic, and then you had high input organic with low tillage. So a lot of manures, a lot of legumes, and as low tillage as possible. And they had decent increase. They had 1.1% up to 1.3% organic matter over 10 years. Rodale Institute has just completed a 30-year study, but they haven't published the 30-year numbers yet. They've published 23-year numbers. So that's what I'm going by for Rodale. Theirs, as you can see, goes from conventional to organic animal-based and organic legume-based. The organic animal-based had the greatest increase of about 0.5% over a quarter century. That was the best organic matter increases they could come up with through tillage systems. Singing Frogs Farm, we started at 2.4% organic matter. And we've been doing it a little more than 5 years now. But within 5 years, we're at over 8.5% organic matter. And we're measuring that, thank you. And we're measuring that at a 12-inch depth. We're not taking the entire profile from 0 to 12, we're taking soil just from 12 inches and sampling that. And that's what we've come up with is 8.5% after just 5 years. That's 1 percentage point increase every year that we're doing this. So, one of our early tools that we used as we transitioned from tillage to no-till was a broad fork. And a broad fork is a really minimal tillage tool. In fact, it really is much more for aeration and decompaction without breaking up soil structure. It doesn't break soil structure, it doesn't actually inject a lot of oxygen like a tiller or a spader or anything else would, or a plow. So we used a broad fork on occasion in the beginning, especially after the winter rains. The rains obviously do compact soil. But as we've gone on with our farming system, we have come to the point where we pretty much never use the broad fork anymore, which is a bummer because I keep investing in them to make sure that we have them in case they break, and then at this point they just sit there collecting dust in the barn. So we've gotten to the point where we might have 5 or 7 crops in one bed in a 12-month cycle, and we might broad fork that bed once in that 12-month cycle, or not at all. So we're really using it very little, but I wanted to mention it anyway. And we recently had a few good friends. You might recognize a few of the people in the picture, but there's my wife and I in the middle with our daughter, and then a couple of our employees are there. Local Rudy Garcia, excellent farmer here locally and with USDA, as well as Ray Archuleta, and then a personal friend, Tom Willie, from another organic farm in California. And Tom Willie brought the 4-foot soil probe with him because they wanted to come check out our soil quality, and one way to do it is just take a soil probe, and they want to pop it in the ground and find out where that hard pan is or where the soil gets to be too dense. And so they put the soil probe in the first inch or two, like, oh, you got gophers, I feel a gopher hole there. And then he leaned on it briefly, and he fell right to the ground. The 4-foot soil probe went right to the handle with almost no pressure applied. 4 foot deep. So that's the disturbing soil as little as possible. Next, I want to look at the growing as many different species of plants as practical. And this is where I get to show just lots of pictures of the farm. And I know you all have wonderful farms and wonderful pictures too, and it's fun to share them. So I'll just go fast through them, but it's nice to see a picture of a farm when you've been staring at a hotel conference room for 2.5 days. So diverse crops, including perennials, growing as many different species of plants as practical. As was mentioned, we do about 140 different species of vegetables, herbs, flowers, plus we have fruit trees, vines, blueberries, blackberries, etc. You can just see some general pictures of crop diversity, including a wonderful kohlrabi. It's a Cossack variety kohlrabi. They're meant to be that big, though that one weighed in at 9 pounds, and usually only about 2 pounds. So that was a mother. Beautiful heirloom tomatoes of all varieties. Just general produce that we're growing, strawberries included, a big broccoli harvest, doing pea harvest. Lettuce heads. We like to do a lot of lettuce heads, not the cut and come again lettuce. We find lettuce heads to be much more substantial in their flavor and therefore more substantial in their nutrient content than the cut and come again lettuces. even though the cut and come agains are really beautiful to see on your dinner plate and in the farmer's market. So, and my kids help out a lot on the farm. Our kids do. But notice our cold valley bottom. Kids are wearing wool hats and jackets while holding freshly harvested peppers and eggplants. So we are cold. We have challenges there. We've had to find heirloom varieties that are adapted to very cold, short season environments that still taste really good and produce really darn well. And that's been a long struggle for us, but we've succeeded. We have some great crops. Savoy cabbages and broccolis, cauliflowers, more Romanesco cauliflowers. That was like I think it was a 14-pound head. Nobody wanted to buy that. But it was a beauty to put out on display and attracted lots of attention at the market. And this picture, why not? Let's just say from the back to the front on the picture, you've got peas, trellised peas, and then under the frost blanket there were some peppers. The next bed forward is tomatoes that actually have intercropped in them some lettuce and escarole. And then in front of that was a mini romaine bed, and then there's another bed of cauliflower intercropped with some lettuces. And then the kids are running down 2 beds that have basil in them and are about to get tomatoes in about 5 minutes after that photo. So a lot of intercropping, a lot of diversity in small spaces. But it's not just crop diversity. This is about agroforestry and perennials as well. So on the right in this picture, you see a lovely hedgerow that happens to include Sambucus nigra, elderberry, that we harvest and sell for quite a bit of money too, because elderberries are really sought after, very great medical crop or nutritional crop. There's also pineapple guavas in the hedgerow, and there are also rosemary in the hedgerow. So we've got a few different economic crops growing in the hedgerow as well. These hedgerows have provided all kinds of benefits. This is a brand new hedgerow just put in the prior year, field on the left, and then the hedgerow in the middle, roadway on the right, and then this is that same hedgerow 2 years later. So it's filled in. We've now got a new hoop house in the background too. So we use hedgerows frequently throughout the farm, very close to our crops, in fact. A hedgerow on the left again with some winter covers, frost blankets, sorry. And here's a tender perennial hedgerow. We didn't do any big bushing permanent perennial hedgerow crops there because that is on the side of a field that would shade the first bed. So we chose tender perennials, which will die back to the ground in the winter, allowing full winter sun in, and then they grow up in the summer, shading them slightly from the excess sun. So here's a nice hedgerows we put in. 10 feet to the left of this roadway is a 200-acre vineyard. And about 20 feet to the right of that roadway are vegetable fields. And that's our hedgerow that we drive up and down between, carrying compost up and down the fields and harvests. So a very generalized layout of our farm. Blue are the ponds, and all the squares, all the different fields we've put in, working on our different pieces and parcels and patches wherever we can. And then what I have this here for is to show you the hedgerows that we have on our property. All those green sections are the hedgerows. We're not talking about just around the perimeter. We're talking you cannot walk more than 100 feet on our property without coming from one hedgerow to the next hedgerow. All those brown spots on there, compost piles. We'll get to compost later. But there's a lot of hedgerows and a lot of compost piles. In fact, we've put in about 3,000 Sonoma County native, pollinator-friendly perennial hedgerow plants on our 8 acres in the past 8 years. And I never like big text slides, but I'll read through this one fast for you because there are a lot of ecological and economic benefits to hedgerows that we forget about. And this is highly important in a diversified system. First of all, you're increasing food for the soil microbes because you have more plant roots in the ground and more photosynthesis happening year-round. So you're creating more food in 2 different ways for your soil microbes. You're also increasing the soil nutrients simply through dropping those leaves on the ground and adding nutrients to the surface of the soil. You're decreasing the wind and rain erosion. You're decreasing evapotranspiration. You're moderating the temperature fluctuations. We've had frost protection from our hedgerows. A 6-foot hedgerow will raise the nighttime temperature by 3 or 4 degrees for up to 20 feet behind it. And it's only 6 feet high. We're not talking about a hedgerow that's over the crops, just next to them. 6-foot high hedgerow brought up the air temperature to give frost protection for about 20 feet to the side of it. We've had that tested over and over again on a farm. It's wonderful. Produces fuel wood, produces small dimension timbers and branches for tools. You can produce animal food. Our animals love grazing the hedgerows once in a while. Obviously the fruit and the other edible parts I mentioned before. Live fences, they help keep the animals out of areas. Nitrogen fixing, if you have leguminous type perennial plants or trees, and they provide habitat and fodder resources for your beneficial insects, your birds, and your wildlife, which is critical. So some of the benefits of our hedgerows, well, I'm gonna go ahead one. So those are some of the critters that we find in our hedgerows commonly. We've got praying mantises, lady beetles, and garter snakes and gopher snakes. And you don't usually see a garter snake wrapping a vole. They usually just snack on them whole, but that garter snake had a big bite to chew. So, and then frogs. We are Singing Frogs Farm. We have a few billion of these Pacific chorus frogs that live in our fields, and we've had many CSA members send us photos of the frog that came in their lettuce head to their home, and they tell about releasing it back into the backyard. But lady beetles, this is a good thing to mention right now. Yeah, there's a good research done at UC Santa Cruz that was looking at how do you encourage beneficial insects on your farm without encouraging pest insects? Because I want to have Mother Nature present. We need to have Mother Nature present. How do we encourage the good parts of Mother Nature more than encouraging the bad parts of Mother Nature? You've got to have some pest insects. They have to be food for the beneficials, but you don't want too many pest insects. Well, UC Santa Cruz did some research, and they found that the beneficial insects really preferred the perennial twiggy plants. In fact, they have this wonderful chart that I need to go find and put in here, showing this really high incidence and diversity of beneficial insects in the woody, twiggy, perennial habitat, and very few pest insects that live in there. Alternately, the annuals, the grasses, the flowers, the herbs, all the annuals have a very high incidence and diversity of pest insects that live in them, and very few beneficials. So what do you want to have on your farm? You want to have perennials, twiggy, woody perennials, to encourage the habitat and fodder resources of those pest insects, or the beneficial insects, year-round, so that when the pest outbreak happens in the middle of January or in early April, your beneficials are already there and ready and waiting for them. So go back one. We've got a gentleman, Phil Persons. He manages songbird nesting boxes on a series of farms in our county. And up to this point, he's only had about 15 songbirds and bluebirds mostly fledge from his nesting boxes on any one given farm. And this past year, we had 44 songbirds fledge from nesting boxes on our farm. So more than 3 times as many songbirds fledged on our farm as he's ever had on any other farm, because we have the habitat and the fodder resources and the quality of life for those songbirds. And that's my son looking in the box. And native ground nesting bees. There's over 1,900 species of native bees in California alone. And nearly all of them are solitary, and nearly all of them are ground nesting, except for the few that nest in deadwood. And native bees are far superior at pollinating than domesticated honeybees. In fact, they've shown that a few dozen native bees can pollinate an acre of cucurbits more efficiently than an entire hive of 30,000 honeybees. And they've recently shown, brand new research out of UC Santa Cruz last year, they were showing that domesticated honeybees, when they are in the presence of native bees, almost triple the efficiency rate at which they do pollination work. So as soon as those honeybees detect competition from native bees, they will triple their own efficacy at pollinating. What better could you ask for than having those native bees doing the work and suddenly kicking those honeybees into overdrive to really do the work for you too? So ever since we've put on both really good habitat for native bees as well as domesticated honeybee boxes, we've had more than a doubling in the cucurbits that we get per plant on our farm. So we've really increased productivity per square foot by having Mother Nature present. We also happen to be a certified bee-friendly farm, and you guys can do that as well. Look it up yourselves. It's a great thing to do. I won't talk too long on that right now. There are many of them around the US and around the world as well. So back to our chart on how to improve soil organic matter. And that is keeping living plants in the soil as often as possible and keeping the soil covered all the time. Because to me, those are kind of the same thing. You have plants in the soil, they're not the same. The plants in the soil means that they're photosynthesizing and putting exudates through the roots into the soil to feed the microbes, and then the roots die back, and the microbes eat the roots, so you have the plant feeding the soil. Keeping the soil covered all the time is all about keeping sun and wind off that soil, so the soil does not go hot, cold day to night, but stays moderated and doesn't have any wind evaporating moisture out of the soil, and the soil organisms are healthier and happier because your soil is protected and covered. So let's go over those. First of all, we use almost entirely transplants on our farm. We use very little direct seeding. I see I have to hurry up here, unfortunately. I'll go through some of this transplant stuff very soon, but you can read it fast. Transplants get a second infusion of nutrients. You get 100% crop cover every time you put transplants out in the field, because even if the germination rate was low in your nursery, you still get a 100% transplant rate out in the field, so you have full crop cover every single time. There's less time in the field for a transplant, which means less availability to pests and more crops per year. It takes less water to get established. Transplants will outcompete weeds that are trying to germinate because they're already a transplant size, and we do big transplants, big 5-6 inch transplants. And the most vulnerable stage of the plant life is in a protected nursery. Just like with our children, we keep them at home when they're young to protect them until they can go out in the world. And when you do transplants, the prior crop roots are dying in the soil simultaneously to the new transplants roots are growing. So you have both dying and decaying roots as well as new growing roots simultaneously in the soil, creating much more soil health and soil life and soil food systems. Plus that 7 to 10 weeks less time in the bare soil. Let's briefly talk about that. The gold standard in California for vegetable production is if you plow under your broccoli crop at the end, it usually takes about 3 weeks minimum to plow it under, till it, let the soil rest, till it, and then you finally have the tilth ready for sowing the next crop. So in week 4, you sow the next crop. Week 5, it germinates. And week 8, it's transplant size. That was 8 weeks from one standing crop to the next standing crop that's only 5 inches tall. That 8-week period of bare soil is compressed down to about 4 hours on our farm. And I want to go over that quickly here. So transplants, nursery, Marty bringing them down to the field, some baby bok choy, my daughter transplanting. There's a brand new transplanted lettuce field. That was the same day as transplanting. And you can see already that there's decent cover on the soil. Yes, it's only about 15% cover and 85% exposed, but give it 2 more weeks and it'll be 85% cover in 15% exposed soil. For instance, that's 2 weeks after transplant. And there we do multi-cropping, which you can do easily with transplants. Those are cauliflower plants intercropped with lettuce. So I have a 100% crop of cauliflower put in the bed first, followed by a 70% crop of lettuce mixed in around it. So I'm getting 1.7 crops out of that bed space simultaneously. Well, what happens to the cauliflower? As it grows, it closes canopy, giving light shade and light windbreak to the lettuce, making the lettuce more delicious and tender and flavorful. Meanwhile, the lettuce is suppressing weeds and suppressing soil moisture loss as a screen or a shade on the soil, increasing soil health. The lettuce harvests out just as a broccoli or cauliflower closes canopy, and you get the whole 2 crops simultaneously. Tomatoes take up a lot of space and a long time to grow, so use the shoulders of the bed for something else like escarole or endive or basil. We have bulb fennel going in the middle of some cabbage beds there, or Brussels sprout, I can't remember. Cabbage cauliflower beds. Got some lettuce down the middle of some broccoli beds. Same kind of thing. That lettuce is being harvested that day, so it's getting wonderful sun and shade protection, and those are full, beautiful heads. And the broccoli still has another month to go. And sometimes just do full straight broccoli, or that's after the lettuce harvested out and the broccoli filled in. So here's a quick turnover of a bed from one crop to the next. This is a new thing, we just did it. I obviously need to perfect the photography that we did here, but so we have a perennial hedgerow on either side, 2 winter squash beds, a Romanesco cauliflower and dill mixed bed, and then a mini romaine lettuce bed that's gonna stay put. And we clear the beds by hand. Yes, hand labor. Clearing the beds, kind of get the irrigation hose off the beds, rake things clean, begin throwing down some calcium, oyster shell calcium, because it was just a heavy calcium using crops beforehand, and they're going to be heavy calcium using crops next, and you can never really have too much calcium. Well, that's a weird generalization. Then compost goes down, surface applied compost. You see the mini romaine beds are still over on the right, growing just fine. Get our lines put back on the beds, and these are round hoses with built-in emitters that will last 20 years or longer. It's not T-tape, which you throw out every couple of years. So these are permanent irrigation hoses, really well built, great investment. Start putting transplants in. Doing broccoli crop here, doing a 3-line across, broccoli, 18-inch spacing. Begin watering it in by hand to get them established before the drip lines take over in a couple of days. And happy employees. And they had to finish the watering too, so there we go. Okay. So in any one given bed like that you just saw, we'll have 3 to 7 sequential crops in a 12-month cycle. My neighbors, my friends, my competitors, they're doing 1 crop per 12 months or maybe 2. And 2 is their gold standard to aim for, and if they can get 3, they're really lucky. They had a super early spring crop of radishes, followed by a lettuce crop, followed by a lettuce crop, short crops. But we're doing 3 to 7 crops per 12 months per year, despite our cold. Not Singing Frogs Farm. Very low intensivity, lots of tillage, lots of soil tilth from beating it to oblivion with a tiller or walk-behind tiller. Compacted pathways, and that are going to be used for growing in next year. Just one little line of plants. So that's kind of the overview. We just hit those 4 things. But I want to look at a big picture overview, literally, of some of these organic farms around us, because it's kind of interesting to me. I looked at this 19-acre certified organic farm, and it's almost entirely bare dirt. Here's another certified organic farm. This is actually the UC Santa Cruz Farm and Garden. Almost entirely bare dirt, like 80% bare dirt. This is just one random pass of a satellite taking a photograph, and it just happened to nail them right when they had that much bare dirt. Next certified organic farm, bare dirt. Certified organic farm, half a mile from our farm in the same valley, same crops, same original soil. Certified organic practices with 2 tillage periods a year, spring and fall, nearly entirely bare dirt. Singing Frogs Farm. If you are going to increase your soil organic matter, you've got to keep the soil protected, covered, plants growing in it all the time. Back to our neighbor a half mile away, certified organic, right? But what's he doing for the soil? Nothing at all. Singing Frogs Farm. Even the roadways are grassed, year-round, constantly, covered. So, compost. Somebody mentioned farm inputs this morning. I actually want to define farmer first, because I think it's kind of interesting to conceive of things as a farmer. My job is to export nutrients off my farm by the thousands of pounds a week. Yes, most of that is water weight, and then there's carbon, but there are also minerals and nutrients. I am in the job of exporting nutrients off my property every single week. Biodynamics is wonderful, talks about a holistic approach to things, but they say that you have to have all your nutrients come from the farm, which means you can't really be in the business of exporting. So biodynamics is wonderful for homesteading, and all the farms that I know that are certified biodynamic in our area, they have a loophole that allows them to bring in huge quantities of manure, because like any farm, if you are exporting food off the farm, you cannot not import nutrients. So permaculture is also fabulous. We're doing a lot of what permaculturists do, but permaculture is really designed for a backyard garden. It's homesteading. And we're in the business of selling food. It's our business. So one soil scientist at UC Davis gave this wonderful analogy that I've never forgotten. And she said, cities are like human CAFOs, human concentrated animal feeding operations. We are pumping nothing but energy, nutrients, medications, and antibiotics into the city and creating waste. Now, our cities are getting very good at recycling aluminum, recycling metal and scrap metal, recycling paper, recycling plastic, but are they recycling all the food waste that they generate? I'm not talking human waste, I'm just talking food waste. All the biological food waste that goes to a city and could be composted instead often goes to landfills or out in the ocean. And in either of those cases, it ends up as either methane and greenhouse gas emissions or oceanic pollution and dead zones. So we need to think about closing the nutrient loop and bringing all that leftover food waste back through a municipal composting company, back onto farms to create the next round of life and food and health. We have to think, good, excellent, your school's doing it, good to hear that. So we need to think about things in a little bit off-farm system, because I'm exporting food off the farm, so I have to include my community as part of my sustainability loop. So my community is the ones who consume the food, produce the compost, and bring it back to me. I could produce the compost myself, but a third party does it much better and more efficiently than I do. And in fact, if you want to make more money than farming, you could compost. It's good money there. So, as I mentioned, we use a lot of compost, but we surface apply the compost. You saw that quick series. We surface apply the compost, and we test for organic matter at a 12-inch depth, where we've never ever put compost. So compost is not the reason why we have improved organic matter. It's the other 4 things we just went through about keeping the soil covered, keeping plants in it year-round, having a diversity of plants, and doing no-till, little disturbance. That is what brings back the organic matter. By the way, in all those photos of our farm, did you ever see any weeds? We don't weed. We don't need to weed. I love being able to say that as a farmer, that I and my employees don't weed. We just don't. I can get back to that very soon, but we don't weed. Our water use. We have 6 ponds on the property. We collect a lot of surface water runoff, and then we pump it back into the fields as needed to go through the crops and down to the seasonal ponds and out to the ocean, et cetera. So we have a lot of surface water management that we do, and we have the dripper lines you can see here. They have built-in emitters every 12 inches. When we first started our farming, and we were doing full tillage and a walk-behind rototiller and a disc and a tractor and plow, we were watering about 2 to 3 hours of drip for our vegetables every other day. And talking to other farmers in the area, they said, yeah, we usually do about 3 or 4 hours of drip every other day, sometimes every day, for their vegetable crops. Since we've gone no-till and built up that organic matter, we are doing 1 hour of drip every 5 to 7 days for the same crops in the same valley bottom under the same weather conditions, but different soil because of our management practices. 2 to 3 hours every other day, now down to 1 hour every 5 to 7 days. It's not just about the water savings, it's about the electricity savings to pump that water and move it, right? You're saving both electricity and water. So, for instance, this roadway here, we're grazing our llama and our milking goat on the road. We have milking goat and chickens and sheep and llama and dog and cats and all that stuff. They're grazing this roadway, which was last watered by rain in April, and this photo was in September, and they're on a stake and a lead rope so they can't walk off in the vegetables and eat the vegetables. But you can see they still have grazing potential after, a 4 or 5 month dry season because of our organic matter in our soil able to hold that moisture there so that the plants can continue to thrive without the irrigation. Another neighbor, not the one you saw before, but another neighbor farm in the same valley, only a couple 100 yards away from us, not a half mile away. This was their farm, and you can see the quality of the soil there. You can see there's no dripper lines. They do overhead sprinkler irrigation, which, by the way, Israel, a nice desert state, Israel outlawed overhead irrigation in 1980 because they know how wasteful overhead irrigation is. 1980, 35 years ago, they banned overhead irrigation. They're all dripper lines. So these guys, our neighbors, are still doing overhead irrigation with sprinklers. They're doing typical tillage. They're certified organic. They had 2 experiences recently that exemplified their farming system versus ours. In October 22nd of 2010, our first rainfall after a long dry season from February to October, no rain, long dry season. That first rainfall that came was a doozy. It was 11 inches in 36 hours. And talking to them on the phone the next week, they were freaked out, they were stressed, they were paranoid. They were harvesting everything they could out of the fields. In their own words, they had 100% crop loss. Their crops drowned. They had 100% crop loss in their own words. We were 300 yards away. Same valley, same original soil, same vegetable crops, different soil management practice. We had 0 crop loss. Their words, they had 100% crop loss. We had 0. Similarly, this past April, we had a 1-inch rainstorm come through in the afternoon. They had just, the week before, sowed a half acre of kale, and that morning they had just flame weeded the half acre of kale with propane flame weeder. And then that afternoon at the farmer's market, we had a 1-inch rainstorm come through, just out of the blue, 1-inch rainfall, and then it was done. It was all pretty and beautiful. And what they discovered was that 1 inch of rainfall falling on tilled, bare soil sealed the soil pores and created a hard crust on the surface, and that entire half acre of kale never germinated. They lost the entire half acre of kale because of 1 inch of rain at the wrong time, because of their soil management practice. And they're certified organic again. So, a couple of things. So, I'm nearly done, like 3 slides left kind of thing. What does all this amount to? Well, there's sustainability, right? We have 3 legs of the sustainability stool: environmental, economic, and social. I haven't really hit on the economic yet, so here I will. The average of all California vegetable farms in the state of California, they average a gross revenue per crop acre per year of only about $2,000. Pretty darn low. And when you look at organic veg, it's almost double that, $3,700. So that's a good thing. They get more value for their money, and they're a little more dedicated to farming. When you look at California's small, diversified, direct market farms like ourselves that are mainly organic, their average sales per crop acre per year goes up to $11,000. That's great. In fact, it equals Sonoma County Vineyards crop acres per year sales. However, Sonoma County vineyards, you must admit, are the highest of any county in California, so probably the California average for vineyards is more like 5,000 or 7,000. So in fact, our small farmers in California are generating more productive revenue per acre than the vineyards. I love that. But new research and new talking amongst many of the university and people in the field, they say that you really need to be earning about 14,000 per crop acre per year, not earning, grossing your revenue. And that's really the bare minimum to be viable in California. And so we have 2 other universities and colleges in our area that are doing their own farms with free student labor, I might add. And they have guaranteed sales to their school cafeteria. And they're doing about 14,000 and 17,000 per acre. So they're doing above the sustainability level, right? And as was mentioned earlier, we're doing about 9 times the state average of productivity per crop acre per year of equivalent farms. There's my awesome farm crew. Not my wife or I, just the farm crew right there. They're the ones who are taking care of the farm while we're here. And we appreciate it a lot. 2 things I want to say about them quickly. None of them works more than 40 hours a week on our farm, none of them, and they don't want to. They are happy with their hours. They manage their own hours, and they call it quits, and they're done at 34 hours in the week, or 41 hours, 40 hours, but 40 is the max, 42 is the max. They don't work over that. They're happy. They have other lives to live. They also, each one of them has told me at one point or another, they've all worked on other farms before coming to ours, and they have all told us at one point or another that they can never go back to working on another farm again. They'll either have to die working on our farm or change careers, because the quality of the work and the quality of life on our farm is far superior. Again, back to no weeding. It's a big factor. So that brings me to really the conclusion here, which is your environmental part, we're no-till, bring back the organic matter, hedgerows, there's no sprays of any kind, low water use, native bees, songbirds. Economic, we're making ends meet. We're paying our employees well. Our starting wage is $12 an hour. I don't know any other farm in our Sonoma County that's paying that as their final wage. They're mostly paying $11 an hour for hardcore dedicated workers, or they're doing the whole work trade agreement. Pitch tent, have as much food as you want, and work for me for 70 hours a week. So, and then job security. Our employees, we are a year-round farm. Our employees are year-round. They don't hire on for seasonal labor. They just get employed and hired, and they stay on until they're done. So we have permanent year-round labor. They have job security, and we're feeding our community year-round. So, in case you're wondering that this can't work in your area, my background again is in tropics, hot desert tropics. I was in the Gambia on the edge of the Sahara Desert, and I was doing very similar agriculture to this in the edge of the desert in the Sahara. Doing great, because it's all about soil biology. It works anywhere. Michael Whammond, he heard me speak at a different conference, and he immediately came on a farm tour the next day, and then 3 months later, he brought his employees and his parents to our farm to say, really, see, Mom and Dad, it does work. I'm not crazy. And now, this past year, he's been doing side-by-side tillage and no-till. And his no-till system in the first year, he's already got 2.5 times the economic returns on his no-till side. And the soil there, that's a picture of his clay. He is on hard rock and clay. It is, I would not want it. It's a parking lot. It's just hard rock and clay. But that picture is from one of his no-till beds with the earthworm going right through that white clay layer and all those roots, all those happy, happy roots growing in, creating the life in the soil that was not there before. So I'll want to end it there with about 1 minute left for Q&A. Check.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have 3 short questions. Can you talk a little bit about weed pressure? Why don't you have weeds? What was your ground cover like when you started? Do you have rhizomatous grasses like Bermuda in the area?
Yes, we have all those rhizomatous grasses, Bermuda. Much of it came in with organic rice straw as a mulch, and that was unfortunate. We had huge weed pressure, lots of perennialized grasses. We have basically no weeds because we surface apply compost, which acts as a mulch. So the weeds can't break through it.
I didn't notice you using a lot of mulch. I didn't see mulch in your
We don't
pathways.
use mulch.
Okay.
Permaculture loves mulch, no question about it. Our feeling is that mulch is a great insulator and reflector of light and heat. And when we come in April to a mulched bed and an unmulched bed, the unmulched bed, because that black rich soil, the soil is about 20 degrees warmer. And we want warm soil. Warm soil creates more biotic life, more activity, more plant root growth. So mulch actually reduces soil temperature in a bad way for us. If I was in Chico in Central Valley or here, mulch would be a good thing. It would help moderate soil temperature. But in our conditions, we want that heat. We don't use mulch.
Can you talk a little bit about initial soil preparation?
Yeah, that's a big one. There's two ways you can do it. The standard permaculture way is you do sheet cardboard, and then you put your bed on top with pure compost. That's intensive, both economically and physically, but it works, and you've completely smothered weeds. We did that for about 5% of our area. 95% of our area, initial bed prep, was tillage. Go out there and clear the field, just how you would with any other farming system, but then build your beds by hand is what we do. Build the beds, and at that point, you will never ever have a tractor or rototiller or walk behind anything in the fields again. So there was one upfront tillage session to get it cleared, but you can see the results even in 5 years later. It was worth it.
I wanted to ask about weeds too, but I didn't quite understand you. You said you tilled it first?
To prepare, we had grass sod that we had to convert over to no-till beds.
Right.
So we had to plow under and till the grass sod. And then we created our no-till beds, and it has been no-till ever since. So the initial preparation was quite destructive, and it felt awful. Yeah.
Okay. I tilled. I have tons of weeds.
You have tons of weeds? Yeah. Well, tillage, weeds are they're the increasers. They're the ones who come into disturbed land. They're the pioneers, and they will be the first ones to come back when you till under the perennial grasses that have been there holding down your sod for decades and centuries. So weeds are the first ones to come in and take over. We do have weeds in our pathways between each of those beds, no question about it. But the pathways don't have crops and don't have irrigation lines, so you can just take a wheel hoe right down it and 5 minutes flat, done. So we just whip down our pathways a couple times a year. So I had a farm tour recently, and Marty and John happened to be standing there, and I said, hey guys, how much have you weeded this year in front of the farm tour? And they both kind of looked at each other and smiled and laughed and said, well, we don't, basically. But we've probably put in about 10 or 20 hours since January, and this was September. So that's what our employees do, is maybe 10 or 20 hours of weeding each over the course of a year.
Everyone, Paul Kaiser.